Welcome back to Podcast Recovery, everyone. We're your hosts, David O.
And Eric V.
Today we are joined by our guest, Mike. How are you doing today?
Hey, how are you guys? Thanks for having me.
Doing well, man. Where are you from, Mike?
Just outside of Philadelphia. I'm in Delaware County. Newtown Square is the name of the town.
Oh, okay, you're not far. We're just, we're a little bit south of Baltimore, so we're a couple hours away.
Yeah, just right down 95.
Yep. So when were you first introduced to recovery?
Well, like a lot of people that I've met in recovery, I wasn't a first-time winner, so I guess the idea of first going to, and the fellowship that I attended was Alcoholics Anonymous. I guess that probably goes back into 2004, 2005 was probably the first time that I, ever even considered, discontinuing drinking. I mean, it's just that ever even dawned on me that was a possibility. And frankly, it was a few years, dipping my toe in and out before, I achieved any type of sustained sobriety to speak of.
And so how long have you been sober?
Right now, my sobriety date, and it did change, unfortunately, but my sobriety date right now is 5/10 of 2019.
Nice. All right. Well, congratulations. And with all that out of the way, I'm going to turn it over to you to share your story with us, so take it away.
Hey, you got it. Again, anytime I feel there's an opportunity to reach anybody with my experience, strength, and hope, I'd like to jump on that. My sobriety date is, again, I'll just say it, it's May 10th of 2019. I have a sponsor in the Fellowship of Alcoholics Anonymous. He knows he's my sponsor. He has a sponsor. And I am working on going through the steps of Alcoholics Anonymous again as we speak. I guess I'll go backwards and talk about my story and briefly qualify how I ended up where I was starting to go to AA meetings. And I grew up not terribly far away. I ended up grew up in Northeast Philadelphia, which is for the most part a Irish Catholic blue collar area. I grew up going to Catholic school. I like most kids. I played and participated in sports, went to church every week. Not that I really felt connected at that point in time or felt like a spiritual person, but, I studied for the sake of getting a grade all through Catholic school, decent amount of theology. So I had a working understanding of the God that the Catholic Church taught me about at a young age. From a very young age, I was, not your typical kid in that I always seemed to be in trouble. And that trouble was, typically, humor by me done on a dare. I can honestly say that, I just never felt comfortable enough being unless I brought something to the table. And for me, typically my way of getting in and gaining acceptance of anybody was doing anything and everything for a laugh. And, I've learned, and I'll touch on that later. I've gotten to, at this point, learn a little bit about, where and why that was the way that it was. I don't know that I necessarily learned how to drink by any behavior necessarily that was in my house. I think my dad was as much problem drinker, probably more so than he was alcoholic. I mean, there were episodes, but there was not like sustained drunkenness that was in my face every day. And, no drinking in the house. There weren't any family members that I were aware of that were, outlandishly drunk and or drug users. But for me, I just, I was even a little bit late to the party. I mean, kids that I was running around with, probably early on in 7th grade were starting to drink. My story is a little bit different than that. I wanted to be around that. But I was too fearful to even, drink because of, I found the taste initially deplorable. So I would be at these parties and, I would actually fake taking the drink. I'd be taking drinks, acting like I was, feeling the effects of it, but I was pouring it away in secret. And it probably wasn't. And then I just did other things that, didn't involve drinking till probably, I think the first time I ever remember really being drunk and being miserably hungover the next day probably wasn't until I was 16 years old. And I would say that from that moment on, that I never, and forgive me, you might hear my dog bark intermittently. He's a little bit of a scaredy cat.
That's fine.
I would say from that moment on, I chased the effect that alcohol had on me that night. I've heard it referred to as a euphoric recall, that feeling of absolute freedom, from inhibition, from anxiety, from anything that made me feel different than or less than. It completely escaped me. And I will tell you that I most certainly I chased that effect for a long time. And, I can reflect back on some of those, early times where, drinking didn't consume me, and it was probably okay to act stupidly and irresponsibly drunk and everything else that I was doing. And later in life, I was all about just wanting to feel like that, my irresponsible, drinking didn't have consequences and ramifications. It was just, in a bubble, and it was just isolated to and in the name of having a good time. And, for many of us, and certainly for me, it wasn't terribly long before things got out of control. Full disclosure for me and my drinking was never about just get drunk under any and all circumstances. I was exclusively a social drunk. I don't recall any time where I ever drank or did anything else mind altering by myself in the comfort of my home. I never really found any type of satisfaction in doing that. However, I would go out of my way at inopportune and irresponsible times to go out when circumstances really didn't line up. Big responsibilities with work the next day, personal responsibilities at that time or that next day, and the want to just chase down that feeling. It just took me to places that it wouldn't otherwise have me. Typically without the drink, I'm pretty conscious of my responsibilities, but, with the prospect of, getting a drink or getting a drug of choice in combination with that. There was nothing I wouldn't do to track that down. There were several cases where, trouble started to rear its ugly head. Some way, somehow, I never got a DUI. I'm not quite sure how that. That's true for some of us. It is for me. But I drove impaired, probably into thousands of times. And, there were some times where I got stopped and, somehow, I don't even know how I was able to, in all those cases, drive away from that. But that's just, the way my story went. I didn't get that DUI yet. I know there's one in my future if I start drinking, that's for sure. I think that, I didn't always get in trouble when I got drunk, but there was a lot of trouble, when I started to get drunk. And most of that trouble was, was in my own household. The impact on my drinking and using was felt first and foremost, around a young family. And, I look back on those times, with really, great regret. My, times, not necessarily when my kids were, really, really young. I was a father at a young age, and I left college to start working at a young age. I was still 19 when my oldest daughter, Amanda, was born. And I'm still married to the same woman today. We got married shortly thereafter when I was 22 and she had just turned 23 back in 95. And, I would say in through my 20s, there was alcoholism lurking in the weed, but, I don't know that I really crossed that line yet. But, I guess shortly thereafter, after we had my second son, Andrew, and then our last child, my youngest, Michael, we moved. And we moved close by, but, I guess I just met some different people. And I guess that was where I can first trace back to, I wanted to find people that drank like me. And I guess as my children got older, I felt like, they were, the babysitters were easy to get, making a little more money. My opportunities were bigger and more pronounced. And, I crossed over that line. And, I remember the, exact time and place where, not only, what's funny is I don't know that I ever really thought about being alcoholic or necessarily having a drinking problem. But I remember a time in my early 30s thinking, wow, this, I think I've given up the ability to be able to drink and not have dry goods mixed in with that. That concerned me a great deal. My drinking did not. I felt that at this time that if I could just drink, without the accessories of my drink, everything would be okay. Yet at the same time, I had no interest in drinking, just drinking. They're a combination. I just reached a point where, those two things went hand in hand exclusively.
Yep.
And, while I'm on that subject, I'll just say that I never did a dry good unless, I was drinking. So clearly, as I work this out, throughout my life, I've come to realize that, the drinking was the bridge. It came first. And, the way that I drink, I certainly drink alcoholically. Moreover, I think alcoholically. And that became a bigger part of things. I guess, as things progressed, both my kids and my wife shared their concern with me about, my drinking and where it was, and that would probably put me in that place where I talked about earlier, which is where I probably went to that first AA meeting, not for myself.
Mm-hmm.
I went because of pressure here at home, and I would go for a meeting or two, and grease the skids a little bit here, and always stop for a week or two. A couple of years might go by, and then the same thing all over again, because I truly didn't have any interest in stopping drinking. In fact, the idea of a life without doing the partying that I was doing was not something I had any interest in, nor did I think was even plausible or possible.
Mm-hmm.
I lost the ability to have joy in anything that didn't involve drinking. So things that should have just been about, hey, a family member's achievement or birthday or anniversary, those just became more opportunities for me to drink and just get ripped. And, not only was I present as I was doing that, I suffered from terrible, terrible physical hangovers. And they were much more than physical, they were mental. So, as my drinking got worse, my recovery, for a day or two after, I never had the notion to drink again to make a hangover or the jitters go away. Thank God I didn't, because my story would have been a lot worse. I just suffered through a hangover and just never had the notion to just drink it away. I sort of knew the hair of the dog theory, but I never prescribed to it myself, if you will.
Yeah.
And then I guess, I was, as this is going on professionally, I am, I'm increasing my earning power. I have a good job, but everything else is, is not healthy, if you will, and I recall losing my first job as a direct result of my addictions. Like any good alcoholic, I had a ton of resentment and anger over that. I took zero responsibility for my behaviors and conduct that precipitated that firing. And, I was, working for a small company. I was making considerable income. And, I was so conceited and so egotistical. I just thought that those opportunities, were, I was entitled to them and thought that I would just land on my feet. And, that didn't happen initially. I went backwards financially. And even though my means went backwards, my spiral, my ascent into, real alcoholism, it went with it. I was, looking back, I was morally and spiritually, bankrupt. I was completely selfish and self-consumed, and, I would do anything, say anything, to get, that next load, forever seeking. I shared about it earlier. I shared about that, that recall of those specific incidents where I felt I had that perfect high,
Mm-hmm.
The first time I successfully, mixed dry goods and drinking and thinking like that feeling of being on top of the world. And, boy, I never did get that back. That didn't stop me from just, polluting my body with any, there was no such thing as enough. It was just more and more and more and more and more. I never made a decision to call a night short, either, I passed out, I blacked out, I was physically taken home, something closed, I was physically taken from wherever I was, or, place closed. I had nothing else to do. Was out of money, and I just, drove my drunk ass home. And great, you know what? I made it home or close enough to home each of those nights. I'm still here to talk to you guys. So back in 2011, I have just like an all-time really, really bad night where law enforcement got involved. I was, taken to a hospital for observation, and I'll just give you the highlights of this night. I took a police escort to a hospital. I was out all night and basically felt that I tried to lie my way out of everything that was going on and how bad that I had gotten, and basically my wife threw an ultimatum at me at that point in time. I pushed it far enough, and I viewed it as a big package. Not only did I not want my marriage to end, but I also I was fortunate enough to wake up in the same house with my kids each day of their lives, and I knew that if my marriage went, it wasn't just my marriage. It was me living with my kids, and I certainly felt like that was on the rocks. So I felt like, it was time to really give a chance. And that was November of 2011. During that time, my family was faced with adversity more than once. My wife's father, who I'd become close to, he took his own life. He was, mentally ill and was, either not on his meds properly or whatever, and he succumbed to mental illness, and that was certainly troublesome, and then about 3 years in, my youngest son was diagnosed with stage 4 cancer. And, he was really, really sick. And, frankly, I didn't know what the outcome was going to be there. And, I had enough of a higher power in my life, and I felt so helpless that I feel like at that point in time, and maybe up until recently, had I, turned things over to something I felt was bigger than me, I sort of knew what my powerlessness was in that situation after his diagnosis. And, I didn't drink through that. In fact, I felt like at that time, the last thing that I could afford was a drink. And, after near enough a year in and out of hospitals and treatment, praise God, he was, taken into remission, and he's doing well today. He's a college student today. And, I gave God all the credit in the world for, his recovery. I felt like, every nurse, hospital, doctor that, had brought Mike back, I felt that was all, I really do. I felt that was all God inspired, but it wasn't, probably terribly far after that, I'll call it that addicted, that alcoholic mind that I have, that has that, great ability to forget. I kind of picked up where I left off. I wasn't drinking yet, but I'd moved away from the fellowship. I had moved away from regular meeting attendance. My higher power was I actually sort of regrouped in early sobriety. I started a business And despite my my time in and out of the hospital with my son Michael, it was flourishing. And I had like I said, I guess I had a new higher power, and that became money. And because of what I've now learned is having alcoholism, which will never leave me, and at this time I'm not treating it. I'm susceptible to relapse, and my ego is just it's just on fire at this point. And I'm self-consumed, and basically every thought is going into how can I, in my mind, grow this little empire and get more and be bigger. And I will say that this was I didn't see it or know it at the time, but this was basically the calm before the storm that would ultimately hit. I did end up relapsing just shy of 5 years in September of 2016, and I came back to AA, but once I guess I let that tiger out of the cage, if you will, took it for granted that I was just going to go out, have a little bit of fun that I was entitled to, and get a little taste, take a little hiatus, and that I was just going to go back. And let me tell you, just from this drunk, it just was anything but that. It was not easy. I almost think that when I was not drinking and using, and I certainly profess and admit that sort of this this pride and ego had really gotten away from me. But I was also prideful and egotistical about this quote unquote time that I had. And when it wasn't there anymore, I failed to realize how that held me together, because I was certainly twisted in the mind. All the isms were back out, and they're running my life. And I don't think I realized that when I had 3 weeks, and the notion came to drink. There was that time, if you will. It had often gotten in the way of me deciding to drink or use before, and that wasn't there anymore. And that physical craving and that mental obsession. I don't think I ever kicked the mental obsession. In fact, I know I hadn't. But the craving had subsided, and now it was just on. It really was. And I guess at this time, this is when my business just starts leaking oil a little bit, because now I have two gods. It's money, and it's drinking and using. And I was so naive at that time. I recall when I was drinking a little bit, I thought to myself, man, unlike before, this drinking isn't really impacting my work. And I just failed to, in that, I was just so blind to what was going on in my own life. I failed to realize just how much that it had affected my work, because my work product was suffering. And I'm sure people around me realized it, although I own the company, so they weren't going to say anything to me. And
good to be the boss.
Yeah, it was at that point in time. It sure was. So on August 12th, 2017, a day that changed my life forever, I was sober. I recall greatly. My wife went down. We purchased a summer home in this time, and my wife was away, and I was home the night of Friday, August 11th, and I had a real desire to go out. And for whatever reason, I didn't. And my middle son, Andrew, was working for me at that time. He came in and said goodbye. He was going to go out for the night. And, my other son was at cancer survivor camp, and I had to go. I had to get up early in the morning. And this is probably why I ultimately decided not to go out and drink. I had to wake up and drive about a 2-hour drive in the morning to go pick him up from his cancer survivor camp. So I remember I'm waiting, by the door. I'm up early, and I get a knock at the door. And at this time, my son Andrew hadn't come home, but this wasn't unusual. He would, kids today, thankfully, they don't, or what I'm about to tell you, I've wrestled with this. It sounds terrible, but they don't drink and drive. And so back to this knock on the door, Saturday morning, August 12th, a police officer and a detective knocked on my door. They asked me who I was. They asked me if I was Andrew Shelley's father, and I said, yeah, and they asked if they could come in. They wanted to talk to me. And walked them in my living room, and I sat down, and that's where they told me that my Andrew had just been in a fatal car accident, and he was gone. And I can't tell you guys that everything, life stopped and everything stood still and everything changed at that moment. I just was devastated. I still am. How I work around Andrew's passing. It evolves. It's different. I didn't immediately drink and use over that. But it wasn't long after. I just was my higher power resentment manifested itself probably 3 or 4 months after Andrew passed, and it was just undeniable. The same God that I gave all the credit to that had, cured my son from cancer 4 years prior was now public enemy number one. And, I knew, particularly as I would drop into meetings and I heard people being so God-fearing and reverent and giving, trusting their entire life to God. I just wasn't ready to do this at this point in time. And me at that time, it was, I hate to say it, it was an excuse to go out. And, I remember vividly drinking and, having my chats and, telling people, I hadn't been drinking, but I am now, and here's why. And I remember wanting to tell people that and have myself hear it out loud so I could justify to myself why it was okay for me to be doing what I was doing at that point in time. And, I justified my poor behavior with my son's name in my mouth as a reason for why I was doing what I was doing at that time. And, it goes without, it should go without saying, and it wasn't a surprise. And while I kept it secret, my business is crashing and burning. I mean, really, really bad. I was, the type of business that I was in, I'll just leave it to this. I was, state licensed, and I was entrusted with other people's money that was to be kept in escrow. And, I lost the ability to not only rationally think, but to work after Andrew's passing. And now, I'm back in the throes of my alcoholism and addiction. And, I was hemorrhaging money. I was making poor choices to try to compensate for that, to compounded things. And, sure enough, it just got worse and worse and worse. And, one of the things that I did, as a direct result of my, my alcoholism was I just, I ignored it. I just, I pretended like it didn't exist. And, that leads me up to, this past, spring. I was looking for ways out, trying to sell the business, get loans, do this, that, the other thing, but it was too far gone. We were about $1.5 million in debt. And keep in mind, this is money that's not mine. This is other people's money. So, I revamped the organization, made it small. We caught up a little bit, but ultimately it was too little, too late. I ended up reporting myself to the state authorities in the places I worked, and then ultimately people that I couldn't pay back found out, and kind of leaves me legally where I am now. Before this coronavirus hit, I was, I've been in court and I've been charged, and there are numerous felonies awaiting me, and a lot of debt. My house is for sale. I don't have but a penny in the bank, literally. And all that big shotism and that, that ego that was running wild, for now has been put to rest. Luckily, back, the one good idea I had at the end of this run, and, there was no real, burning bush moment like I had prior. There was a lot of bad nights, but, nothing that I had ever considered while I was drinking and using to be such that, man, I got to stop. It was just, I feel like, I feel like something divine happened. I, was, irresponsibly drunk like I would be any other time, back on May 9th of 2019. And, without real heat at home here, I just said, you know what, I'm going to give Eddie another, rather nondescriptly. I didn't go in there, tail between my legs, because at this point the real trouble hadn't, crept up on me. I sort of knew it was coming, but I was still living in denial. And thank God I did go back there, because I can't imagine going through what I ultimately went through at the end, having still been drinking. I ended up hurting a lot of people that I was entrusted to, whose interests I was entrusted to protect. And boy, I have a lot of guilt, shame, and remorse over that today. I wish I had the financial means to be able to making immediate amends and restitution for those actions. That's going to work itself out in time, and I will do anything in my power to make that right. Moreover, I started to really realize, with the help of a new sponsor I'd had two before that muscled and bullied and befriended more so than anything else, and had probably chosen because I felt that I was in a friend zone with them, and that maybe I wouldn't have the level of accountability that would make me uncomfortable. And that was light on them. They're great AAers, both of them, a ton of sobriety. Guys I'm still friends with today. But I just wasn't in a place where I could really, accept their sponsorship effectively. Today there's a different man in my life. The way that he comes at me is a little bit different, a little more challenging. And, that's good for me today. I attend AA meetings every day. I'm doing it virtually now. I've turned my will and my life over to God. I've made those amends. I realized that, God didn't kill my son. The only way I was going to be able to honor him with what life I have left here on earth was going to be by coming back to AA. I saw what they had done for so many people in the time that I was there. And it's doing for me today things that I could never do for myself. I'm learning as I'm taking steps again about, why I am what I am. And I truly learned, that, my drinking and my drug use was just but a symptom of who I am and how I tick and how I operate, when I choose not to treat, that part of who I am. And, when I do that inventory, not all the things in stock and trade are bad. But a lot of it was defective. And, that's part of what I'm looking and working on as we speak right now, recognizing those things and specifically what their impact is on me, admitting how, different relationships, how different things made me feel, how they affected me, what their impact was on me, and then cumulatively, how they made me tick. Those resentments, those fears, that sex misconduct. Those things that frankly were just left unchecked for so long. That's not the case anymore. I wanted to take any and all commitments I can get. That's why I'm doing this tonight. I realize the importance of this thing being so much bigger than me. It's just about sharing this thing, and the best way to get out of me is through you. That's part selfish, but part giving back, what's been so freely given to me. So many people spent so much time, talking to me, completely unselfishly. And there's something very attractive to me about giving, back to that. And, when I'm truly in the right space doing that for all the right motives today, that beats any high or drunk I ever had in my life. That's the truth. And, today, despite, what my legal consequences may ultimately end up being, I accept that. I accept my powerlessness over that. I accept the fact that whatever is going to happen, it too shall pass. That I'll be afforded another opportunity. at a second, third, fourth chance, take your pick, whatever that's going to be.
Yeah.
To recover a day at a time, and not just do things for me, but do things for those in the fellowship, do things for those for God, do things in honor of my son and for my family that's still here, who I love more than anything. I can't be my best me if I'm doing the things and thinking the way that my old me did. So,
absolutely.
I don't know where I'm at on time, but that's what I got. There's probably things that I left out that perhaps if you're going to prod and question, it can come out. But that's sort of as linear a story as I can tell and think of right now.
Oh, that was perfect. That was great, man. Would you like to go first, Eric?
Oh, you can go first, David.
I can go first. Okay. All right. So you talked about, like, early in your story, sort of being like somewhat of like a humorous or like good-natured troublemaker, and like I related to that a lot. And like it always seemed that with that I guess moniker, or like people seeing me as that troublemaking kind of mischievous kid, it always seemed to sort of snowball on itself. So how do you think, and how does negative attention fuel negative behavior?
Well, for my experience is that, at that time, I certainly didn't realize that the attention and how I was seeking it was negative. It validated me, and it made me feel accepted, because I always felt, while I wasn't an outcast socially by any stretch, looking back on it, I just didn't feel like comfortable in my own skin, if you will. And that did, as far as it's snowballing, I guess that I was in and out of character, but I never, gave up that sort of, nor was I not proud of the fact, hey, Mike, he's crazy. He'll do anything. He's the funniest guy ever. He's a lunatic, man. We love when you're partying with us. And frankly, as I was struggling with staying sober at times, I'm still telling myself, hey, fuck it, man. You're just a bad boy. Like that's you're not, you're not this teetotaler, like this sober guy that's out there saving the world one drunk at a time. Like, you're a party boy. You're a bad boy. That's who you are. That's who you've always been. And that's just the way this thing's supposed to play out. So in terms of it snowballing, yeah, man, I identified as that. I don't have a year yet. So I'll bet I had those thoughts consciously and subconsciously, a year ago. And so I would most definitely say that snowballed.
All right. All right, Eric, what you got?
All right, so let me see. I have three main questions I want to ask. So we'll start with, you said this kind of goes together, where you mentioned kind of in the beginning of your story, I think towards the end it changed a little bit, but when you first entered AA, you said you were kind of more of like a weekend warrior, or you found an excuse to go out. You didn't drink by yourself. And sometimes I feel like people can have a difficult time comparing in to when like their story doesn't meet a certain level with other people's stories, or like, I never did this, I never did that. So did you have any issues comparing in to the stories you heard when you first came in to the rooms?
This is such a great question. So I vividly recall being in AA meetings and reading, like, say, a chapter like More About Alcoholism, big book, and I recall this whole thought process centering around, am I really an alcoholic? The whole thought process. Well, man, like, I didn't lose this, and this yet. Like, I'm not drinking every day. Now, what I didn't probably touch on is the fact that I was probably drinking, 3 or 4 days a week. Ultimately, like the Friday and the Saturday nights were bleeding into whenever I could, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, didn't matter. And every Thursday for sure. But, I really, really struggled through that initial extended time in sobriety by thinking about what made me different than, instead of, and rather than whatever singular common thread. I never realized, like, I have a new qualification, okay? Anybody that ever attends you drop in the 12-step meeting. Anybody that ever attends one of those for the first time, ever, voluntarily, not in handcuffs, guess what? They probably are whatever that addiction you want to drop in that's dealing with that 12-step program is. Like, you got it. Like, there's no or justifying or providing conditions on it. Like, when I went to that first AA meeting sometime back in 2004, 2005, I was an alcoholic because it's the only disease that I'm aware of that can only be cured if you're going to self-diagnose yourself. Anybody out there can tell me, what they hate about my drinking and using. That doesn't mean a hill of beans to me or most people that I've talked to that share, share addiction. It only matters once they've diagnosed themselves and then took the second step to that, which is like, being willing, having willingness to do something about it. But I always, man, I thought to myself, hey, man, are you just like, a drug addict in denial? Like, if you didn't do drugs when you drank, could you just maybe like drink, like you would feel the effects like alcohol would have on making you tired and you just want to stop? And man, I had so many of those internal conversations. That was when I touched on the obsession never leaving me. That was a part of the obsession. Me really never identifying myself in Alcoholics Anonymous as a part of. But, I focused more on the part that was unique about me. And, that's my pride and ego too.
All right. I kind of want to like bring up a little bit of a kind of more of like a round table thing real quick. Because like I think there seems to be a common thread through our society as a whole that alcohol, for whatever reason, is just not seen in the same light as other drugs. And I don't agree with it. Like, I think alcohol personally is one of the worst drugs out there and available and readily accessible to everybody. And I don't quite know why that is. So how does America need to change our reality and our relationship about alcohol?
I'll answer that, and I think that that couldn't be more true. I mean, I'm locked up in this house and I'm watching, I'm consuming a lot of just like episodic television, man. And I just can't believe how they depict and show people drinking. It's just insane. I mean, every scene, somebody's got a drink in their hand.
Yep.
But, more to that question, I'm assuming that each of you are familiar with Chris Herron or a little bit about his story.
Yes.
So, there was ESPN did a 30 for 30, special on Chris Herron that I watched, and it really touched me. He was a young father, similar age to me, and it really touched me. But more recently, and I think in the last year, he did a special, and it was called The First Day. And, really, this is a message of prevention that I think is at your point, that, what we don't do is really, 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 from the backside in, counsel and teach kids at those early vulnerable ages, what innocently might seem like a little red Solo cup in a basement or down in the woods, really like where and what that is going to lead to, and talk and frankly talk to kids at those ages, about the isms and the behaviors and the things that they think that they might be seeking refuge in alcohol and or drug use as a safe haven, and really, where that ultimately leads to. It's just temporary. It's just fantasy. And, I think the deal with, and I think ultimately we're going to live long enough to see legal, marijuana sales in this country. And, frankly, like alcohol, think of the money that is behind these, Anheuser-Busch's of the world and these producers alcohol, and just think about the advertising dollars that are spent on alcohol to promote it. And just frankly think about, and this was a struggle for me in early sobriety, and it still is now. You know what? There's just a lot of places and people and things just I can't be around because alcohol's intertwined in all of that. I mean, there's just so few things, event-wise for sure, that go on that don't involve drinking. And while, I've accepted the fact that they can and I can't today, I just don't want to be around it. And, why is it so socially acceptable? I don't even know. I'm not well-traveled enough to know if it's a U.S. thing versus a worldwide thing. But I certainly think that there's a lot of money at stake. It's why it took think about how long it took for the fate of tobacco in this country and cigarettes. We knew for a long time before. That message is put out there, literally cigarettes, what it can do to your health. But, even still, I think we've known for long the potential effects of alcohol, yet it's for sale. Nobody's there to legally police it. It's glorified in almost every medium that's out there. And I will tell you, that, at the school level, at the counselor level, at the parent level, we don't do enough to really, cut the train off before it leaves the station, talking to kids candidly about where casual, quote unquote, fun drinking can and ultimately does go in so many cases.
Yep. Agreed. What about you, Eric? What do you think about it?
Repeat the initial question again. I know I just want to hear the actual, like what you originally asked.
So how does America, or just society in general, how do we need to change our reality and relationship with alcohol? Because like the way I prefaced it was like, yeah, okay.
So I am of the belief, and I know I'm going to be the controversial one here, which I know probably is why you asked the question. So
a little bit.
I believe everything should be legal. Pretty much. I mean, there are certain things that, crocodile shouldn't be legal, but I believe most things should be legal. But I don't believe it is I do believe in commerce. I believe in capitalism. And I think that it's more about education, right? I don't want to punish people for my wrongdoing. Just because I can't do something doesn't mean someone else. I mean, that's a little bit of what's happening right now with the pandemic that we're currently in. And hopefully by the time this episode airs, we'll be out of that. But, I would let's look at it from that sort of perspective where the whole class had to get punished, right? And I don't want to have to punish the whole class because I'm an asshole who can't, I can't drink, right? And it's okay that, it's okay I can't. And I need to be okay that people can. And I am okay with that. But I think the most important thing is to educate. Education.
Yes.
And real education. Not the bullshit that happens. Like, I don't know where it is now. It's been a long time since I've been in school. But when David and I were in school, and DARE was a thing, DARE was awful. It was not a deterrent of doing drugs. It was very much like, I recall very vividly of this guy smoking a cigarette, playing billiards, driving like a nice sports car, and he had like 2 girls on his arm. And it was like, do you want to smoke cigarettes? And it's like, yeah. What do you mean? He has like a Corvette and he's shooting pool and he has these 2 hot chicks. Yeah, I want to smoke cigarettes. And it's like, he died of lung cancer 3 years later. And it's like, and it showed like a guy who's like an accountant. And it's like, what is, no. Like, that's like, no. We're like 7th grade kids. What do you think we want? And it's the same thing with alcohol. Like, don't give like fake facts. I mean, kids, don't lie to kids. Because eventually they're going to know that it's a lie. And I seriously believe education is the only way. Because, I mean, yes, stronger regulation, sure. I'm for regulation. I think regulation, is definitely something that, like, drinking limits. I don't know. Is it the right thing to be like, hey, let's monitor our blood alcohol content? And it's like, I think like 2 to 3 beers, I'm fine. I should eat some bread before I get in the car, have a glass of water. And it's like, what fucked up science is like, are we sure we're right about that?
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. So, there's no metric because bigger people, small people.
The blood, yeah, like the bread and water ratio, like what? That's stupid.
I know.
But I'm just like, yes, tighter regulations, better education. But, I don't know where it really stops, right? Because I don't think people should be able to drink and drive. And no. I don't. Like, I don't think you should, and I know it defeats a lot of like the going out and having a drink, but like, I don't know. We grew up, I guess, at like, and like, don't get me wrong. I've drank and I've drove, and I've done drugs and I've drove.
Yeah.
I don't think it's right. You know what I mean? And I don't want to punish everyone, but even just the logic doesn't make sense that if I'm impaired, I'm able to drive. So I just think education and maybe like slight adjustment of laws, not something crazy, but let's see what's actually like a realistic thing. Like is something stupid that needs to be changed?
Yeah, no, I agree. No, I thought both of you brought up really great points. I really liked Mike's point about how it's portrayed in the media. I mean, and he brought into like the tobacco industry into that as well, which I like very much because like that's something that changed in America. America's relationship with cigarettes and tobacco changed. Like I have old Life magazines and Saturday Morning Post where it's just nothing but cigarette ads, where it just shows it as very blasé and everybody's having a good time. Like John's having a cigarette just to relax and blah, 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 blah. And you had Joe Camel, like that, like they said, oh, this is marketing towards kids. And it's like, okay, well, what about all these commercials where all these people are, what he said, like partying with a red Solo cup? Like that is very much a high school age, college age thing where people in like our society are like still forming an identity. And if they're forming an identity around alcohol, like they were with tobacco 70 years ago, like something needs to change. Like you don't see those pro tobacco ads anymore. And I don't think and I like what he said. Like, I don't think there should be these really distorted pro alcohol commercials anymore. Like I think it is a little bit ridiculous, but again, like he said, follow the money, which I think is wrong. But to your point, Eric, with like the stricter, I think there should be stricter regulation, and in some states there are, especially like not maybe necessarily with drinking itself, but drinking and driving. Like it's gotta stop. Like that like I don't excuse myself for my drinking and driving. Like there were numerous times when I like pulled up to my house and like took the keys out of the ignition and I'm like, oh my God, I have no idea how I got here. Like, I don't even know, how did I get down the road? What roads did I take? I had no recollection of how I pulled into my driveway, but thank God I did. But like in other states, like it's gotten to the point where like if you get and obviously I don't think it should be like a one strike system, but like there's like a 2 or 3 strike system that like you get a third DUI, you're never like I know in North Carolina, if you get a third DUI, you're never getting a driver's license ever again. Ever. Like it's done. You are not driving. Like you have to deal with public transportation because you have shown repeated actions that you do not deserve the responsibility or the privilege of driving. And I think that needs to be a lot more stringent. Like with one DUI, I think it should be like, hey, you're not getting a license back for a couple of years. With a second, you're done for 5 years. And like there's a lot that needs to be changed with alcohol because in my mind it belongs in the same conversation with heroin and cocaine and like all those more like what are seen as more extreme drugs because it's very pervasive and it's toxic to our whole society and it needs to change. All right, Eric, what do you got?
It's me now. Okay.
That was a good one. That was a good discussion.
So you mentioned faith, and you even said before you came on here that you were doing, you were raised Catholic in the beginning of your story, and that you do Bible study, and faith kind of came up a few times throughout your story. So it's kind of like a few-part question, but where does faith stand in your recovery? And how would you describe your spirituality today?
So I mentioned that that I was, doing a like a Zoom Bible discovery before we got started tonight, and I have to be candid. This is newer behavior for me. I was through mutual friends of my wife's, and she was actually attending this church going back, probably 6-7 years ago, on and off. And I guess she was at a meeting and mentioned I guess a part of my situation to him, and it obviously wasn't pretty, and whatever. It piqued the pastor's interest, and we've met for breakfast a couple times. My wife and I started going to his church, and I'll say this, that it's on the front line of my recovery, and I'm going to go a step further than faith. I always had faith. While I always played God in my own life, I knew I wasn't it. I always felt that a supreme being existed. I was quite afraid of the vengeful God that I felt that I learned about in my Catholic educated youth. But today, having come back into Alcoholics Anonymous, I realized that I was going to have to step away, not away from faith, but it was going to have to be, there's going to be trust there. And that's completely different than faith. Faith to me is all about knowledge. And, we all probably know where knowledge, got all of us at some point in time. I know where it got me. It kept getting me drunk and high. That knowledge didn't do anything. But this time, and I say this time because I try to really recall, some of my former missteps. I trust that my higher power has a perfectly placed plan for me. Trust me, with some of the things I've told you I've gone through, I don't like those things. Those trials that I've had to go through. They've been amongst the most painful that a human can go through. Yet at the same time, I have found myself thanking my higher power for my adversity, because I know that without that adversity in my rear view mirror and the understanding and acceptance that more adversity may be to come, I wouldn't be where I'm at right now, which is where I believe I'm supposed to be. And again, I told you, I had to make peace with a higher power that, and I won't hold back. I'm going to use the words fucking hated, despised, blamed for taking my son from me. And, I almost made the correlation myself, like, okay, I'm not living in a way that you like. So since you're so almighty and powerful, you're going to show me, big bad God, you're going to take my son from me. How dare you? I mean, that's the conversation that I'm having in my head at this time. But I guess, time healed that wound, and so did my brokenness. I'm ratcheting things up again, and I'm spiritually bankrupt. That first drink, furthest thing from my mind is a higher power. You know, I know, you know, I know some people that, you know, probably have a warm seat waiting for them in fellowships. And at the same time, you know, they show their face at church every week, like clockwork. And I'm not judging them in any way, shape, or form. But, you know, I don't know that, you know, my faith isn't about reciting chapter and verse out of the Bible. But I believe that, you know, my spirituality is essential to my recovery. And I don't believe for this drunk, I couldn't get this without that. Like, to me, there are no parts of my program that aren't spiritual. Every part is. You know, the me part has a proven track record for getting me drunk and high. When I turn it over, you know, I got a chance.
Love it. All right. My last question is, what does recovery mean to you?
Well, it's another opportunity not to be taken lightly. I had never until now made recovery the focal part of my life. I felt like I was being truly disingenuous if I even tried to say that it was. I felt that recovery prior meant keeping me in good enough condition so that I can look good on the outside looking in and make a lot of money. I was that. Okay. I connected my financial well-being and how I felt about, you know, my professional status as being, you know, what my recovery equated to. I realize today that couldn't be further from the truth. So with, you know, as soon as I wake, my first thoughts are God-centered and recovery-centered. I start trying to think about who I might be able to help today. You know, who am I going to call? So what it really means to me, I guess, in a nutshell, and you know, this might sound, you know, like a cliche. I've heard it in meetings before, but I had to put it first. And it is today, and that's not to slight how much I love my wife and kids and family.
No.
Yeah, you know what? And that's how I really looked at it before. But to me, it's that, you know, without that, you know, it's frankly, it's the first, you know, anything I put in front of it, man, it's just going to be what I lose before it. I guess also recovery to me is a lot about self-love. And that's a real work in progress because, you know, it's not often talked about, at least in my fellowship. You know, it's probably something for laying on a couch and talking through a little bit more, which I do as well. But you know, but recovery gives me an opportunity to even explore, you know, that part of things, and that is, you know, letting go of the past, and you know, loving myself for who I think I can be, versus what I've been and what I've done. That doesn't necessarily make me. It just you know, just goes to prove that you know, I was sick, and you know, I'm recovering from an illness, and Unlike some illnesses, like, if you're diabetic and some other things, you have it forever. My son, I mentioned his cancer, he was cured from it, thank God. He doesn't have cancer today, if you will. Now, he needs to take care of himself in different ways than others who've, been pounded with chemo would have to. But nonetheless, to my last breath, I'm going to have this alcoholism hanging over my head, So recovery, just in a word, it's first. That's the way I could say it today.
Perfect. All right, Eric.
It's that time, David.
It's that time?
Yeah.
All right. It is time to go to the Twitter, ladies and gentlemen.
Uh-oh.
All right. This is actually from Instagram. Today.
Oh, mother.
Do you want a Twitter question, David? We can do a Twitter question. We'll do a Twitter question.
No, it's up to you. You are the ambassador of the social media.
That's true. I need to get better at it too. I'm a little slow sometimes. All right. Well,
we can get you a badge that says that.
We'll go a little bit back in time. So this is from Kat Dixon, from Twitter.
Ooh.
And it's a topic. So
okay.
And I'm sorry, David. Whenever I ask you this topic, we get a lot of questions about it. So the way this will work, Mike, is you'll talk about the topic first, then David, then myself, and the topic is relapse and shame.
It's part of my story. I relapsed, and I guess I'll consolidate my answer. I could have a lot to say about it because I think about it quite often. I just mentioned that I look back on past failings to try to avoid them in my current recovery. But I will say this, that the shame, it really prevented me when, I walked back into a meeting. It really had me isolate even at the meeting. I didn't really want to talk to anybody about having, not having that time, having 3 days, and I've, now I'm on my 7th slip inside of the last 6 months. I was embarrassed. And I just didn't run into somebody who just kind of grabbed me. And even if they had, I kind of ease my way in. When I'm not drinking, I'm not that character. I'm kind of a recluse and a little bit shy. I just know that the shame kept me from really just getting back into the fellowship because I felt embarrassed and weak and less than. And, my ego lied to me and said, well, you're a piece of shit that can't stay sober. And, frankly, it kept me sick longer than perhaps I needed to.
All right. I am the anomaly in this group. I'm the one that so far relapse is not a part of my story. And I'm working on it. For anybody out there who's listening, if you've ever heard the phrase that relapse is a part of recovery, that is not true. It can be part of your story, but it's not a part of recovery. And it being part of your story is, it is what it is. Like I think there is stigma and shame that can be attached to it from outside sources, and all I can do as somebody who has never relapsed, and I don't have personal experience with it, the only thing I can control with it is how I treat those people that do relapse. And I don't treat them any differently. I don't come down hard on them. I don't judge them. It's just a choice that I haven't made. yet. Like, is it still a possibility? Yeah, it absolutely is. Like, it could be part of my story 5 years from now. It could be part of my story 10 years from now. It could be a part of my story a week from now. I work every day to not let it get to that point. But for anybody who's relapsed and given up time, or is a chronic relapser and can't seem to get time, all any of us can do, relapsers or non-relapsers, is do our best on a day-to-day basis to try and get a little better in our recovery, in one form, fashion, or another. Like, so don't. My advice is, don't let other people's opinion of a relapse weigh too heavy on you, because their opinion of your recovery is irrelevant. It's how you think you're doing and how you can improve, and ultimately what you can learn from the experience. Don't put any labels on yourself either. Try not to experience that shame and guilt to the best of your ability, and realize it may have been a mistake. That's okay. We're human. We make mistakes all the time. Recovery is not perfect. I've made many mistakes in my recovery. I try not to beat myself up about them. Take them as they are and move forward to the best of your ability.
So I've spoken about this a lot. Relapse is a part of my story. I've had some time and recovery. Actually, both times I've relapsed, I worked the steps. Both times, so, had a few years, but it's. Let me see. For me, and this is just for me, the shame of the relapse didn't come until later. So the initial use, and this is both times, I didn't have shame. But don't worry, I definitely got there. It took 9 months, but eventually I got to a point of shame and I came back. So that can always be the worst part, right? Is when you relapse and it's okay. Because the second part to this topic about the shame, that doesn't come until a little bit later. So yeah, I mean, that's for both my relapses too. Like, they're just, I don't know. It was like a switch in my head, and the shame didn't come until a bunch of bad decisions later. And that's it. Yeah.
All right.
All right, cool.
All right. Well, we would like to thank our guest, Mike, for joining us this evening.
Woo! Yay!
We appreciate it. You did great, Mike, and we're very thankful and appreciative to have you on Podcast Recovery.
Hey, have a great night. Continue a great recovery, and we all got today. Take care.
Take care. Here at Podcast Recovery, we are aiming to expand the scope of support for recovering addicts. Accessibility and convenience of helpful services is paramount to combating addiction. We work to bring the message of recovery to every addict, wherever and whenever it is needed. We believe that a powerful voice of recovery should be obtainable, practical, and at the touch of a button. Every addict deserves to hear a message of hope, and Podcast Recovery is here to provide it. All right, everybody, thanks for joining us. Make sure you follow us on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram. Check out our YouTube. For more information about us, go to podcastrecovery.com. But most importantly, everyone, stay safe and stay clean.